Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank Graham for a lovely lunch, and it was very, very good. So I'm really excited to be moderating this session, and we're going to be talking about implementing food systems and sustainability and equity at Hopkins. And so we have three speakers today: Raychel Santo, Graham Browning, and Emily Yao. And Raychel Santo is a program officer at the Center for a Livable Future, where she is working in various roles since beginning as an undergraduate research assistant in 2010. Her work is focused at the intersection of research, policy, and partnership development to advance more sustainable diets and food production, just and resilient food systems, and climate mitigation practices. Raychel received her undergraduate degree at Public Health Studies and Global Environmental Change and Sustainability from Johns Hopkins. And during this time, she co-founded the student group Real Food Hopkins and the Blue Jay Perch, a community garden at Johns Hopkins Eastern. She later completed her master's degree in food, space, and society at Cardiff University School of Geography and Planning, with the support of the US-UK Fulbright Commission. So really looking forward to her talk. We also have Graham Browning, and she started working with Hopkins Dining last summer as part of the transition to self-operation. She's a background in environmental public health and environmental science with a master's degree in industrial ecology from Delft University Technology in the Netherlands. She's previously worked in sustainable packaging development for Unilever, specifically with recycled plastic technology and fiber-based food packaging. At Hopkins, she's also the advisor for the Blue Jay Perch Community Gardens, so really cool. And Emily Yao, she's a student at the Johns Hopkins University studying material science and engineering. She works to build a more mindful, cleaner future through disrupting current food and energy systems and innovating sustainable materials. She's the president of the Alt Protein Project at Johns Hopkins, and previously was the VP Technology and Director of Education. She has led journal clubs, moderating panels with company leaders in alternative proteins, and she also has initiated and designed curriculum to bring technical courses and training to protein manufacture technology and 3D printing lab-grown meat. So looking forward to these presentations. So Raychel, thank you.
Thank you, Dee, for the introduction, and great to be here. Some of you were in the conversation earlier today where we were talking about the research side, and now we're going to talk about the practice side. And I think I got tapped as giving this overview, but some of the work I'll be presenting is not mine, and I have a colleague here, Daphne, who was able to join us, but wasn't originally able to. So if there are any questions, especially about the Meatless Monday campaign, Daphne is the one who will be our answer. But so I've been affiliated with Johns Hopkins since I was an undergraduate back in 2010, and have been at the Center for a Livable Future in different roles since then as well. And during my time undergraduate career, was very involved in the sustainable food movement here on campus. And so some of this work is kind of summarizing what came about then and what's happened in the interim, as well as some of the work of my colleagues in the Meatless Monday campaign. I'll just put this out there that I think we're in a unique institution because we have some of the leading research in food system sustainability, and we also are doing some of the leading practice in food system sustainability. And we are, as we'll be talking about, the home of the Meatless Monday campaign, which began in 2003 and is now a globally recognized campaign. And we were also one of the early signatories of the Real Food Campus Commitment, and we signed it at one of the most ambitious levels across the United States. I'm going to talk about kind of what that looked like, and then we'll segue into Graham talking about what are the sustainable food practices that we're doing now. So to start with, Meatless Monday at JHU was born here through some conversations with the founder of our Center for a Livable Future, Bob Lawrence, the former dean of the School of Public Health, Al Summer, and the former advertising executive, Sid Lerner. And they were talking about the connections between a diet high in saturated fat and the increased risk of chronic preventable diseases that are resulting from those dietary patterns. And as they were having these conversations, series of conversations, there was a Surgeon General's report that they were reviewing that was talking about how reducing consumption of saturated fat by about 15% could help support the population in meeting some health goals. And Sid Lerner recalled that Meatless Monday, which began during World War I and continued in World War II around rationing for wartime efforts, is also about 1 day a week is about a 15% reduction in, well, in this case in meat, but it could be a potential new strategy to revive the Meatless Monday campaign for this new purpose and for both individual health, but also the health of the planet by reducing the environmental burdens, particularly of meat consumption and production. And so Meatless Monday was kind of pitched as a simple and effective way to start building awareness about the connection between health and the environment, and also to potentially lead people to start making those better choices on other days of the week as well. And so there's a lot of really creative marketing and campaigning that comes from Sid's background in helping advertise and make messages more popular among the general population. And the Center for a Livable Future, its role that we provide technical assistance and serve as a scientific advisor to the Meatless Monday campaign. And my colleague Daphne is one of the key staff members who really does an amazing job supporting the campaign through a variety of efforts, including research projects, literature reviews, communication and science translation activities, educational programming, and outreach. And some of that outreach is happening at Johns Hopkins, which is what we'll talk about. This is also just putting into position part of a global campaign, and it's recognized in over 43 countries. And the messaging is slightly different because if you were on our panel earlier, all countries are not the same in their current consumption of meat, and the way that we need to shift diets isn't quite the same. And so recognizing that these campaigns do differ in different places, but the general principles of Mondays being a good starting point for helping people who are seeking to change their health behaviors. I should also mention Meatless Monday is part of a broader Mondays campaign strategy where there are other potential benefits that you can start on Mondays, such as smoke-free Mondays. I'm trying to think of what some of the other ones are, Daphne. Healthy Mondays. There's a whole variety of campaigns. But just the idea also being that at the beginning of the week, that cyclical nature is an effective prompt to start behavior changes. And in terms of Meatless Monday at Hopkins, it has been featured in different Johns Hopkins cafeterias, particularly on the Homewood campus since 2010. It actually started the year I began as an undergraduate. And I was actually, my first role at the CLF was as a Meatless Monday student research assistant. So I did some work early on in the Meatless Monday world. And so here's some pictures. You can see Daphne and some of our other colleagues in different roles. And one of the key elements, I think, at Hopkins, but also in many other situations, is that the focus is on providing fresh, ample vegetarian options on Monday, not removing all the meats. In some Meatless Monday campaigns, they did remove the meat, but in ours, it has been focused on making sure that there are options to be able to, if you choose to eat meatless, having good options rather than taking choices away. So featuring those options, highlighting them, making them particularly enticing on Mondays. And the CLF team has also implemented surveys of students' perceptions of meat reduction in Meatless Mondays. And you don't need to read the fine print. I don't even think you can, but just to see that, I think this is 2019 versus 2016, there's an increased proportion of students who think that students should have more meatless options on most days, not only on Mondays. And this was, I think, an interesting idea, but I had not thought about it much. That has went down. So there's increasing awareness among students about the campaign. And also students have indicated a growing interest in climate and the environment, with the green being the most recent survey, seeing that health, environment, and climate indicators are going up in terms of what their rationales are for cutting back on meat consumption. So there's a growing, even in just a few years, time frame of awareness of these connections. And then in terms of Hopkins, Johns Hopkins more broadly, around and beyond the Homewood campus, there's also been some efforts to integrate this into the employees and cafeterias at the hospitals and other healthcare facilities. The School of Public Health has had some signage at their locations and featuring the campaign as well. And as another example, the Office of Student Health and Wellbeing highlights Meatless Monday on their website and social media accounts and has done a Meatless Madness feature where they encourage staff and students to vote on the best Meatless Monday, and they have brackets. So just creative ways to talk about these messages. And again, it's not just that we won't necessarily meet our sustainability goals just through eating meatless on Monday, but that this is a good behavior change effort to help raise awareness and connections and kind of a stepping stone to broader dietary change, especially among people in countries like the US, where we eat a relatively high portion of meat. And then lastly, I'll just mention that the Meatless Monday has been incorporated into a lot of our educational offerings in terms of courses. We also have student research assistants. And as I mentioned, that was kind of how I got my start at CLF. And so if there's students here that are interested in this work, keep an eye out for those opportunities. And then lastly, I'll mention other sustainable food procurement efforts at JHU. Back in 2013, President Daniels agreed to, after 3.5 years of campaigning by our student group, to sign the Real Food Commitment, which committed our institution, at least at the Homewood campus, to getting at least 35% of our food from real sources. And in this case, there's a whole calculator and set of metrics defining what real is, but they have 4 basic categories: local or community-based, ecologically sound, fair trade, and humanely raised. And I should say that when he agreed to sign 35%, that was actually much higher than what we had asked for and what other universities were asking for. The norm across the country was 20% and asking for 20%. So he signed at 35 in a last minute, or maybe he was planning it, but we didn't know he was planning it, situation where he was in the process of signing it. He crossed it out and wrote 35. So it was a great ambition, and we were excited to see if it was even feasible, particularly in Maryland, where we don't have an abundant supply of local food year round. And there are a lot of barriers to some of these particular values that we were looking to address. And so, spoiler alert, we didn't quite make 35%. And I'm sure, Graham, you could talk about some of our current goals, but it was challenging. And there were a number of barriers that came into place, but we did hit 30%, which I think is really great and worth noting, considering, again, that most of the signatories across the US signed at 20%. So we did make a lot of progress, and trying to think of just doing the quick summary, but we didn't end up measuring it the last year due to COVID changes in the supply chain and changes in how we ended up implementing this. And this is also, I will say, by dollar amount. So not by volume, but by dollar amount. And the vast majority of these foods were from the local and community-based category. About 76% of our real food purchases fell into that category. It was a little bit more challenging in terms of ecologically sound and fair, in particular, in terms of finding reliable and consistent and affordable options in those categories. But also, I think one key takeaway from this is there weren't specific breakdowns within those different categories of how much we wanted to achieve. It was just, it had to be one of those 4 to count. And so as a result, I think we often fell to the local and community-based because it was the simplest, the easiest, and in some cases, most affordable of those options. But in terms of developing values-based food procurement standards, it is something to consider, because if you want to be supporting more humanely raised animal products, you're not necessarily going to get those by just purchasing local or even ecologically sound. There's a lot of research that suggests that just buying local doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be improving the environmental impacts of the food production. You have to make sure those producers are also using certain agricultural practices. Doesn't necessarily have to be organic, but that the way that they're incorporating those practices is reflected in your standards and what you're buying. And I will also mention that there's continued movement in the food procurement space outside of universities to expand these types of metrics, to incorporate different values, more values, and also to incorporate other measures such as more climate-friendly foods. So not just where the foods are coming from, which is what most of these values are, but also what foods are we serving. So can we increase the portion of plant-based options at the table? That wasn't really measured through this calculator, but newer versions of the real food calculator are being launched as we speak, and there are efforts to incorporate all these additional values into them. So I'm just going to say, segueing into Graham, who's going to talk now about what we're currently doing, since my part of the presentation kind of stopped at the end of 2019, 2020. And we have been doing some great work in the food procurement space, but also around food security and waste reduction, and integrating some new targets into the JHU sustainability plan. And there's a climate labeling study that's going to be in an effort that's underway that I'm sure, Graham, you'll probably be talking about. So anyway, happy to talk about it more later. Thank you. Oh, wonderful. Oh, that's perfect. Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. As Rachel mentioned, I am Graham. I am the sustainability manager for Hopkins Dining. I started in June, and that is because we went to self-operation. So we mentioned that earlier, but really what that means is that previously we had contractors who were on campus, catering contractors. And a few years ago, Hopkins made the decision to go self-operated, which means that everyone on our team, our dietitian, our marketing team, our menu developers, our executive chefs, and even our hourly employees are Hopkins employees. They get the benefits of being a Hopkins employee. They get better pay, get benefits, and we are on campus all the time. So we get to see the ins and outs of how Hopkins Dining runs. We get to check on the quality of our food, and most importantly to me personally, make sure that our ingredients and our menus are sustainably sound. So what I wanted to bring up with that is that while it was the right decision to make, it is not a particularly easy decision to follow through on. It is very much a labor-intensive, cost-intensive process. So we are now halfway through our second semester on campus. And while we've come a long way, there's still a lot to do, which is exciting for me because being at a key research institution, there are always new innovations coming forward that I'm very excited to incorporate with our dining program. And I think our mission statement says it all. And don't tell my boss I don't have it memorized, but it is: Hopkins Dining cultivates innovative experiences that nourish the well-being of students, embrace authenticity, and fulfill our global responsibility. So I think that kind of encompasses everything that we want to be as a dining program. So we very much understand that the roles of our menus and our ingredient choices play a huge part in the health of our students and our planet. So I just wanted to touch on some of the themes that we are addressing today, and will continue to do so in the years to come. So first is minimizing food waste by using best preparation tactics, which we give trainings twice a semester to our hourly staff on how to properly trim and clean vegetables to reduce the amount of food waste that we're creating in the back of the house. And also to prepare in shifts rather than in bulk, which was previously done, which can lead to a lot of overproduction. So that was a big change from our previous contractor. And that takes a lot of training for staff who have been here for 30+ years and have worked with contractors. It's a new way of working, but I think we're seeing some real success in how much compost we're producing. We also are working on forecasting ordering volumes more accurately to minimize spoilage and waste. So let's say that, you're forecasting for serving 1,500 students a day. We're working with data management systems and also with post-production data that our employees work on to be able to better forecast how much we need to order so that we're not having to throw away pounds of cucumber that potentially go bad. We also compost all of the food scraps back of house and also plate waste that's left on plates after our students come through our dining halls. We have been working with a composting collection company for the past 10 years called Waste Neutral. They're locally owned, and they take our food waste out to a industrial composting facility about 50 miles away. They're one of the biggest in the region, and they provide a lot of the nutrients for the surrounding area farms. They can process everything, which has been a great relief to me, being a previously sustainable packaging person. I worked a lot with PLA, so bioplastics, and a lot of places cannot process that into compost because the temperatures don't reach high enough to break those down into monomers, basically. This composting facility does. So they can take PLA, They can take bones, which a lot of composting can't take either because it takes a lot to break those down. So all of our, and I'll touch on this later, but all of our packaging from our residential dining halls is compostable, and all of our retail dining packaging for things that are prepared in-house is also compostable. So that was my big pull for the first probably month and a half of my time here. I was in the back in the storage rooms digging through boxes of stuff that our contractor left when they left. They had a lot of mismatched stuff, and that's not necessarily their fault. It's also because of the supply chain issues with COVID. So we've created an ordering system where our location managers have a list of pre-approved items that they can order from. No one can just go in and order whatever they want. Everything has to be compostable and has to be approved by myself before it's put through to order. We are also educating students and staff on the environmental and financial impacts of food waste. So I'm a part of the SLC. I'm part of 2 working groups. I lead the food and dining working group, and then I'm also part of the zero waste planning group. And we are revamping the Weigh Your Waste campaign during Earth Week. Don't tell students, we don't want to let them know so they don't change their behaviors, but we are going to be revamping that to kind of see how much food waste is coming back on students' plates, educate them about the environmental and financial impacts of that. And so they'll actually be able to see how much food they're wasting. Instead of putting it on the dish tray, out of sight, out of mind, they'll actually be able to see volumetrically how much they're wasting. Material waste, I kind of touched on this already, but like I mentioned, we only have compostable to-go items in our residential locations. We are also working with our external food services like Bento Sushi, which is in Charles Street Market. We are moving them to compostable packaging over the summer. We are also working with any new vendors who are coming online with our new student center with contract language that includes specifically the use of renewable compostable packaging, so that eventually we're hoping we'll have a zero waste campus, which is part of the sustainability plan. We also follow the waste hierarchy when considering waste treatment. So that is the fun little pyramid that goes remove, reuse, compost, recycle, incinerate, and landfill. Landfill being obviously the last option. Whenever I am looking at new packaging that we want to buy or new products we're bringing in, I always look at, okay, what aspects of this can we remove that are not necessary for function? Because we don't want to create waste just for the sake of creating waste. Let's see. So food footprint, we talked about a little bit of this with Rachel, but we emphasize plant-forward dining as a key way to a key method to reducing our carbon footprint. So we are working closely with CLF and our Hopkins Dining dietitian to implement and expand the impact of Meatless Monday. And as Rachel also mentioned, we are working on a climate-focused food choice research initiative in the future about the impact of climate labeling in our dining halls and how that impacts students' choices of proteins, basically. We're also going to be working with a postdoc at Hopkins to look at the combination of nutrition scores and climate scores and how that could be integrated into one overall scorecard for a best choice for our students. We are also taking inspiration from other culinary traditions to help feature plant-based recipes. So that can be evidenced in, we've implemented a passport station at Hopkins Cafe, formerly FFC. It's on a rotating menu every 2 weeks that features an international cuisine. And every rotation through, there is always a meat-free option to give students the experience of these dishes without necessarily needing animal protein. And we've also partnered with an organization called Strong Roots 9. It's a husband and wife culinary team from Georgia who highlight indigenous plant-based dishes and practice true farm-to-table cooking. And they come to work with our staff at least once a quarter. They'll be here during Earth Week. And I really think that their mission statement, again, haven't memorized it, but it really encompasses everything that I want that partnership to be. It is to create modern opportunities for Americans to reconnect with our nation's natural heritage from the perspective of the people whose ancestors helped build it. I think it's an awesome mission statement. So I'm really excited to work more with them. It's been a really interesting experience to have them in our kitchens and see how our staff respond to them, and to look at just how you can treat plant-based recipes and they can still be just as delicious
as something with animal protein. When it comes to social equity, we aim to address all aspects of social equity when making purchasing decisions. This will only continue into the future. So this is things like fair pay, as we discussed, improved livelihoods, equitable share opportunity, and fighting systemic racism. We're going to be working over the summer to develop a baseline from which to grow, and where we can kind of help fill these gaps and create a more informed procurement method. This is a big part of what President Daniels wants to address, and I think it is intrinsically entwined with sustainability from an environmental perspective, is the equity perspective that comes along with it. And we also purchase as much as possible from underrepresented farmers and businesses, such as BIPOC farmers, LGBTQ+ businesses, women-owned businesses, disability-owned businesses, immigrant-owned businesses, and or veteran-owned businesses, because a lot of those can actually overlap. Currently, we buy from over 16 BIPOC-owned businesses and over 25 women-owned businesses, and that's only going to continue in the future. We're actually currently working with one of our local distributors who are kind of working on a plan to further expand the ability for these underrepresented farmers to be able to produce at the scale that we would need to get into our dining halls on a regular basis. So that's an initiative that we're going to be working on with them come fall, which is awesome. I am going to speed through this because I'm going kind of slow. I got a lot to say. So local and seasonal menus. So one of my main goals is to source as many local ingredients as possible. As Rachel mentioned, it's hard to keep a year-round menu here. A lot of the best harvest is happening when students are not on campus. So most of the time people define local as within 250 miles. And that's kind of a generalized definition of local. When we talk about 250 miles here, that's Maryland, Virginia, can extend up into New York and New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania. So it's local. To me, it's regional. And so I want to expand that and kind of have a new definition, which I want to call hyper local, which would be within a 50, 100-mile max radius. And this is a big push from President Daniels as well, to partner with more hyper local Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and maybe some of the surrounding counties, because we do have a lot of local farms. As you can see, if you go to the farmers market under 83, it's massive. So I can say that right now we are sourcing from over 30 local vendors, and plan to greatly expand this in partnership with our local distributors. And we also want to maximize seasonal production calendars. So obviously there's like a production calendar, a seasonality calendar, and we want to line up side by side parallel our menus with those seasonality calendars, I guess you could call it. So when we have our menu planning sessions, we're going to start bringing in that seasonal calendar and saying, okay, here's a list of what's going to be seasonal. What recipes do we have that can feature that? And how do we educate students and bring awareness to the fact that we are using green beans from 25 miles away, and right now it's asparagus season. How can we incorporate more asparagus into our menus that is both, highlighting the seasonality, but also highlighting how delicious we can make asparagus and plant forward eating. And finally, animal welfare and sustainable seafood. So we strive to source from producers that follow the highest humane production standards. We're starting to quantify a baseline now that we can improve upon in the coming years. And we're working on a transparent purchasing log that keeps track of this information so that we can see as we expand our portfolio, not only in volume, but also in the number of producers that we're buying from, percentage-wise, how well are we doing in selecting these animal proteins that are humanely raised. We also prioritize the purchase of antibiotic-free and hormone-free animal proteins. We are already doing this with all of our fresh chicken, beef, eggs, and milk. Actually, our milk producer, they are from Pennsylvania. We actually chose to go a little bit further than we wanted to. We could have bought milk from a dairy farm here in Maryland, but there is a dairy farm called Kreider Farms that's out in Pennsylvania, and they actually also produce eggs. And they use their cow manure to recycle, dehydrate, and turn into chicken bedding. And they are completely solar powered, and they have a circular gray water system. So that was the reasoning behind, as Rachel was mentioning. sustainable and local don't always intermix. We could have chosen more local, but they don't have as many sustainable practices as this farm does. So we decided to go 50 miles further, but get, I think, 3 times the benefit of sustainable farming. And we also have a preference for third-party certified sustainable seafood, and traceable seafood is really important, especially ASC, MSC, and Seafood Watch. Our main seafood vendor is built on sustainably caught or farmed seafood with full traceability, and with an emphasis on maintaining local species. They actually have a really cool initiative where they harvest and provide an invasive species of catfish to the region to chefs at a discounted price, so as to help increase that harvest of the invasive species to let native local species thrive again. So that's something that we're going to be working with in the future, to kind of develop menus around these kind of species that may be native somewhere else, but are not native here. And I think that's it from me. There's a lot of stuff that we're working on. I could have never imagined the amount of work that goes into moving a dining program from contracted to self-operation. As mentioned, I came from the food packaging world, not from the food world. So it's been a really great learning experience for me. And I think this summer, especially with a full academic year under our belt, we're really going to see some progress towards more sustainable menu planning. So yeah, thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily. I am representing the Johns Hopkins Alternative Protein Project. So I'm going to talk more about how student leaders are reshaping current food systems and how we're building awareness and excitement on this issue. So I just want to mention first that the Alternative Protein Project is a global student movement. Our parent organization is the Good Food Institute, which was actually founded by Johns Hopkins alumni, Bruce Friedrich. And the Good Food Institute focuses on promoting alternative protein and connecting industry with science and policy to expand the field. And so all of these each chapter has its own mission, objectives, and main goals. And I will talk about that later. So why Hopkins? Our student group was started in spring 2021, so we're pretty new, and the Alternative Protein Project as a whole was actually started, I think, in 2020. So it's a very new concept, and whenever I am on campus or like tabling and talking to students, a lot of people don't know what alternative proteins are, and I just want to clarify that we are not only cell agriculture, we are not only plant-based, we're all of alternative proteins that are made without the animal. So our mission is to innovate current animal agriculture away from the reliance on animals, so we can build better and sustainable food systems. And so why Hopkins? Hopkins is a leader in biomedical research and public health, and these problems can all be mitigated by applying biomedical solutions to our food systems. And before I mention like what our student group exactly does, I just want to briefly explain why alt protein and why choose this solution. So this is like the holy trinity of the alt protein landscape. We have plant-based, fermentation, and cultivated. These are all the different technologies that we encourage and promote for our student group. And so a lot of so plant-based is like your tofu, your Impossible Burger, Beyond Burger. Fermentation is usually used in like alternative dairy products, like Perfect Day. And then cultivated is your lab-grown meats. And also these technologies can also be hybridized, like you can mix them up. And so the first reason that I want to mention is that alternative proteins saw target the problem of innovation and growth in our current food system. So traditional animal agriculture hasn't been innovated in hundreds, thousands of years. We've been using the same practices over and over again. And in this world where we have an exponentially increasing human population, it's just not realistic when you like calculate the math. Like we don't have the resources to supply the the growing meat consumption per growing population. And then another thing is the environmental problem of animal agriculture, traditional animal agriculture. So on this left side is the World Resources Institute describe like they have a number based on the greenhouse gas emissions per gram of protein. And as you can see, a lot of the plant-based options are much lower than beef, lamb, and goats. And also, yeah, and the other chart is basically displaying the same thing. It's much higher, more than like double when you look at lamb and lamb compared to beef, even. And then ethics. So not only are there limitations, not only is animal cruelty an issue. For instance, when you see factory farming of chickens, they have overworked lungs, stressed heart, achy joints, weak legs, but also we've been modifying and domesticating our animals and livestock to grow an unnatural size. And there's only so much you can grow a chicken, a cow, a pig, and it's just not practical to innovate in this type of way. And lastly, safety is a huge issue when you're looking at antibiotic resistance, disease, pollution. And animals raised in confined situations are consistently fed low doses of antibiotics, and this leads to antibiotic resistance. Only 31 antibiotics are deemed medically important. And why are animals being fed antibiotics? It's to just increase yield, honestly. And when you're also looking at zoonotic diseases, livestock pathogens that infect multiple hosts, the percentage you can see on the right. It's an emerging trend that is very concerning. And also when you look at how pollution is connected and how that affects our health, from like wastewater treatment plants, that waste can go into our aquaculture and then into our food. The pesticides in our agricultural soil can also go into our water sources, our farm produce. So it's all connected. So we need to innovate new ways to produce protein. And also the industry is massive. When you look at the scale of how animal protein is produced, for instance, in North Carolina, there are waste pits similar to like the manure lagoons. This is actually from a pig factory farm. So just think of like the waste and the smell that can disrupt communities and ecosystems. And so what does our chapter do? Our chapter at Johns Hopkins University, we focus on 3 main goals. So awareness, generating excitement among students, and just like letting people know that this is a solution for our climate, and education, building alternative protein courses, and research, encouraging students to start research projects. So some events that we've had relating to awareness are, we have Beyond Burger Grill Nights, ice cream socials, movie nights, to just get people to try out these new foods, because I feel like a lot of people are hesitant to. And there's also a problem with, one of the main problems with alternative proteins is the price point. And we don't want alternative proteins to be a food for the elites. We want anyone to be able to afford it, to be able to try it. And then we also have guest speakers and panels. So every year we have an industry panel bringing in experts from the alt protein fields. This year we focused on cultivated, and last year it was alternative fats. So how do we innovate flavor, which is really important. And then, yeah, we also have alumni events. Rachel has spoken for our group. And then we also had a alt protein course last year. It was the first at Hopkins. We only had, I think, 12 students in the class, but they were assigned with, they were paired with a startup. It was a global, any startup around the world. I think the companies just applied to take on students. And so basically they had team projects, and they basically did a consulting project for this startup. So a lot of good research experience and presentation experience. And we invited professors to speak for this course. So we had Dr. Doug Barrick from biophysics, Dr. Warren Grayson from biomedical engineering, and yeah, so, oh, and Brent Kim from Center of Livable Future as well. So alt protein is a very interdisciplinary topic, and we invited a lot of different speakers to come and speak on it. And then we also have research. I'm going to be honest, this has been a struggle for us, just encouraging students to take on projects. It takes a lot of work. Students here are already so busy with their coursework, their own interests. And so we've been really trying to email professors and generate excitement among students. And we also have had community outreach events. So we analyzed the mechanical properties of Impossible Burger, for instance. And then we had an ice verification demo at Henderson Hopkins. And then just taking inspiration from other universities and chapters, our Alt Protein Project community is global, and we have once a month community calls where we celebrate small wins, talk about how we can further engage students, and plan new events. And so Duke University, they are hosting their first ever all protein symposium next week. And then Stanford and UNC already have courses rolled out pertaining to all proteins. And also Tufts is a major leader in cell ag research. And just to end with this quote, students are the backbone of our future food system. strong education and training programs are needed to grow the next crop of alternative protein talent. And if you guys are interested in learning more, we have a website, LinkedIn, Slack, as well as an Instagram.
Great. So we got a couple minutes. How many? I don't know. 15 minutes?
No.
Oh, 4 minutes? Okay. Panel, get up there. Okay. All right. Questions, please. Stan.
Three for Grant.
Yeah.
It's great to hear all those good things going on. One is we've been pushing it all toward organic foods, and second is I gave up bananas some years ago, and because of all the energy CO2 it takes to get it to me, and then somebody in my quick meeting said, no, don't worry about it because they come by ship. It's not like the blueberries that get from Ecuador that come by plane. So could you comment on that? And then one for our last speaker, you mentioned food for elites. My understanding is it's certainly cheaper protein. Plant protein is cheaper. Is this because you're mentioning elites because there's subsidies for regular meat or dairy and that sort of thing? Or why is it elite if it's cheaper? Thank you.
Oh, okay, so first we're talking organic and then we're talking about like freight, like ship, yeah, okay, so organic, so. Difficult question because in theory, organic is good. At the same time, it's very expensive for farms to maintain their organic certification. So one thing that I want to do, which is a little complex, is a lot of our what counts towards a sustainable certification. Organic is usually the most popular one that people have, but a lot of the small farmers, local farmers especially, can't afford to maintain that. So we're looking into how we could partner as a big research institution with quite a lot of money and grants from the government to be able to help facilitate local farmers to be able to get that certification if it's something that will allow them to enter the market in a more, for them to be able to get into, say, a mom's organic market where most of the stuff has to be organic. If that's something that they need to be able to jumpstart their farm to reach scale, then that's something that we want to help them be able to do. I also think it's important to expand beyond the certification and look at what people are doing in practice that may not have that organic certification. They may not be able to afford it, but they're still doing the practices that would certify them if they were able to pay, if that makes sense. And as for like air freighted versus cargo, so definitely it is less emitting in some ways. I think there's like a mileage that freight can actually overtake air transport. But from what I know, it's also complicated because of like the lifespan of produce. To be able to put on a ship would be lower emissions and would probably be bad to you by the time you got it. I do know that there are some policies in place in other institutions that I want to look into as well, where they say if it's under a certain mileage, it has to be brought in by ship or an electric truck or something like that. And there are also like different levels of, I'm taking so much time. There's so many levels of emissions. So things like a scope 3 emission is what a lot of people measure. And that's basically what the item is. And then if you go to scope 2, it's around how it gets there and the kind of transportation. And scope 1 is how the resources used to make that item are harvested. So I think the sustainability plan is looking at how we can measure all of those levels because it's so complex. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, absolutely.
But quick follow-up, the certified, once you have it, right? So
No, you have to maintain it on a yearly basis.
It's
It's
like
like
not a lot of expense after you have it.
if you expand your business, it's like per product. So if you get bigger, it becomes more expensive. Which, it's kind of counterintuitive. You want to grow your business, but then it gets more expensive. So yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I should have specified, like, I'm not talking like tofu, beans. I'm more talking about these newer technologies and newer products out there. For instance, like alternative meats So that's definitely more expensive than your like steaks. Yeah, cow. It's the least ethically produced at the supermarket. And also like vegan cheeses are so much more expensive than like just normal cheeses. So just making the price point like lower, so to increase affordability for consumers, so that they have the option if they want to. Sustainable.
Any other questions? Uh-huh.
Did you find anything interesting when you were doing like the analysis of the like alternative proteins or like the plant-based proteins? I don't know if you were actually there for that event.
Which event?
It seemed like in one of the alt protein events, you were doing like chemical analysis of some of the plant-based proteins, like the Beyond Burger. Did you
I was not at the event.
Okay. If you all found anything interesting
About the mechanical properties of like the hospital burgers, and I think Molly was trying to, yeah.
I think the purpose of that event was less so to understand, less so to investigate or understand the chemical properties, more so to demonstrate the chemical properties to the students. So, for example, was it beyond or impossible?
I think it was impossible.
So, impossible burgers are made with a synthetic meat group. So, the idea was to demonstrate that we could do this synthetically. We could create something that mimics the texture, sensation, and the experience of an animal-based protein. Using these synthetic proteins. So we essentially what happened during that event was that we showed the students how you could extract that beef protein and demonstrate that it's very similar to how it would if you were actually eating a genuine beef burger. So less so us trying to understand the consumer, more so demonstrating the science that already exists.
Interesting. Well, I think that we're out of time, right?
Well, our next session for that 3 right now.
Okay, more questions? I actually have a question for Rachel. So I read the paper that you sent me about the real food work that you guys did, and you were saying that one of the things that made a lot of local producers not actually qualify as a local producer was because the ingredients that they incorporated into their foods, like a lot of bakers, the wheat comes from a different place. Are they rethinking how they're gonna define that?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's been a lot of pushback on that, because Hopkins isn't the only institution that signed this. And I think that's one of the benefits and challenges of signing something that is a national type of campaign, is that you have standardized metrics that we can compare our progress against other institutions, because sometimes you'll hear statistics like we're purchasing 50% of our food local, but well, what do you define as local? Is the local Pepsi plant like count as local? Because that was what our two food service contractors ago, that was what they were proposing was part of their local. So you just have to be really clear with like what is involved in that definition. And the original real food calculator only considered ingredients. The ingredients had to be local, not where they were processed. And it made sense because they were trying to avoid the situation where you have large conglomerates that happen to be locally based. But it also excludes then local bakeries and other processors who are small scale, but also sourcing ingredients that might not be able to be sourced locally. And in that case, they were trying to work with one of the local bakeries to source organic flour because they couldn't source local flour, but then it made it too expensive. So it's like this back and forth to try to get it up. That one decision would have gotten us up to like 34% or something if those bakery products had counted. So there's a lot that goes into these numbers and the nitty-gritty details. So I think it's important. I don't know what the resolution was, but they revamped the real food calculator. They just relaunched it. So I don't know what they decided, but I do know that that was a big part of the conversation. And I know in our sustainability planning conversations, we talked about, is there a way to differentiate the goals for local ingredients versus locally processed small company foods? Because in some cases you might want to support both. So just being really clear about what those goals are and what metrics we're reporting on.
And like how to make those decisions too. So like if there is a locally women-owned, BIPOC-owned bakery who's making cupcakes that we want to buy and sell to our students, but the flour's not local, the chocolate's definitely not grown, like the cacao is definitely not grown here. Do we choose a like can we choose that and count that? Like, how do we make that decision of what outweighs the other? Is it the local product and supporting the local economy and supporting underrepresented businesses? Or is it supporting like organically grown or locally sourced ingredients? So there's been a ton of conversation on how we actually like use the word ingredient versus product. And I think that's kind of what we're playing with now.
Interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Because I have one. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Quick one. Any thought of expanding this to ABL?
So funny you should ask. I think it was, I was not a part of the organization before they made that decision. I know they just switched contractors, actually. And we talk very like frequently with Liz, who's down there. I know she's working with them to make more sustainable choices. I don't know if we will be expanding down there just because of contract switching, and that decision was made after we decided to do just self-op on Homewood. And I will say down at Peabody as well, we take care of the Peabody campus. And I know that there are discussions around what the future looks like for Hopkins Dining, if it's going to expand to other campuses, since it is so spread out. But I definitely think that's conversation that I've been privy to, but definitely not the decision maker in that sphere. Yeah.
Lucky you, right?
Right, I know. Imagine.
But Daniels runs it all, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
be fine.
yes, exactly, yes.
Any other,
So,
sorry, any other questions? I have one. So given the fact that Hopkins is doing this and using the real food calculator, is there an opportunity for like more systemic change to like big distributors of food and things like that?
I think it's already happening,
Okay,
honestly. I think a lot of the big distributors have really doubled down on, honestly, I think probably local. I think that's one of the hardest things though. So we work with a large distributor a lot, but we also work with smaller local distributors that are specifically focused on sourcing local ingredients, which has been super helpful. With the large distributors, it's hard to get enough information to make informed decisions because they get products from so many places that sometimes it's hard to trace it all the way back. Like we were mentioning of like, you get a product like a macaron, so you order a macaron. It's very hard for you to trace back, okay, macaron, where did the ingredients for that macaron come from? What distributor did that person use to get the ingredient from what distributor? But I definitely think even in my 8-9 months that I've been here, I've seen the conversation really shift with distributors that they know this is the direction that not only we are going, but a lot of other campuses and even beyond higher ed are going. And I think they're listening because they're going to be left out if not, because we're not going back the other way. It's only escalating. So
awesome.
I'll just say, even just in, like, we've made major progress since I was a student. When I was first involved in this effort, we had Aramark as our food service contractor, and we couldn't even get access to the receipts to see what we were purchasing. That was a whole year-long plus conversation to get that access. Then we went to Bon Appetit and they were more transparent, but now we're at the point where we're like full transparency. We're working to develop what metrics are we tracking. We have so much more support and capacity to start making these shifts, because you can't even start to make progress if you don't even know what you're buying or where it's coming from and all of that. So I just kudos to you all for being so cooperative, to being open and willing to work to make these choices.
and thank you for processing our data.
Sure, Stan.
Really quick question. The church at 29th and Charles, they feed the homeless once a week, my understanding. So with the food that's left over in the cafeteria, you have to put all that in compost, or is there any way? My wife said that too, she says you can't give that to people because it's whatever. So it all goes into compost. There's no way to use it for feed hungry people.
So we are working with actually the founders of Strong Roots 9, the husband and wife team that I talked about. They have some really strong partnerships with Food Rescue Network. So we're actually working with them to try to develop a business case for off the line collection. There are, of course, some like safety and health concerns. We are protected under the Good Samaritan law in many instances. But there are just some liabilities that we have to work through, that once it leaves our door, the 4-hour clock starts on when we have to keep it at a certain temperature, and then it falls on their responsibility. So it's where does the responsibility end? We've partnered in the past. So at our Christmas break, when students left campus, we partnered with an organization called Good Harvest. They are run out of St. Vincent de Paul in Baltimore, and they provide 3 meals a day to, I think, close to 80% of the homeless shelters in Baltimore. They're a huge organization. And they will basically collect anything, but it's also about the volume that makes it worth their trip to come collect. Because if they take it to a shelter and we've only given them 2 cases of something and they actually need 4, they run out of things to donate. We also have a food bank on campus. And I think there are close to 500 people registered there. We're trying to work with them on how to get them enough food as well, because I've been in conversations and they've said that, they'll send out an alert that they have eggs available and they'll be gone in 5 minutes. So there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of things that we can improve on with donation. It's just about how we do it safely and how we make sure that the quality of the food and the amount of food is strong enough for people who really need it. So,
Wow,
yeah.
great. Any other questions? This is such a great conversation. Thank you so much.